The night Hogwarts trends on TikTok starts like this. A shaky vertical phone video, filmed by someone who definitely should not be this close to a dragon. You see the silhouette first. Those familiar turrets cut out against a stormy Scottish sky, windows glowing like a low-res postcard from your childhood, while a massive dragon just casually sweeps past the astronomy tower. The camera lurches, someone swears, and the comments start detonating in real time. Best CGI ever. Marvel could never. This is real. I live near here. And the classic, what filter is that? Then it hits 1 million views. Then 10. Then it's stitched, duetted, slowed down, zoomed in, color graded, and turned into a thirst edit for the dragon. Because of course it is. And over this absolute circus, you hear a voice cut in. Not the creators. Ours. Look, this isn't a fan edit. This is the night the Statute of Secrecy finally snaps under the weight of Muggle tech, global satellites, and a very, very bored internet. Smash to montage. A news anchor in New York arguing with a VFX expert who keeps saying, if this is fake, I want to hire whoever did it. A British morning show host asking if Hogwarts is part of a viral marketing campaign. A cable pundit yelling about national security because a dragon apparently violated UK airspace. Cut again. Reddit threads titled, Mandela Effect. Did anyone else remember a magic school in Scotland? Old blurry photos of flying Ford Anglias. Weird lights over the English countryside. That one grainy shot of a giant near a forest line. Users are drawing red circles, connecting yarn, and someone's posting a 47-minute breakdown called Rowling was trying to warn us. Meanwhile, in a perfectly normal suburban living room lit only by LED strips and a ring light, a teenager is live reacting to it all. Behind them, with a soft pop, 3 Ministry Obliviators apparate into the shot. Robes, wands, the whole disaster. The chat goes feral. NPCs glitching. Okay, this ARG is insane. Did anyone else see that? Yeah. Take a moment. If you're wondering how we got here, remember, the books ended in 1998. The real threats were still buffering. After Voldemort face-planted out of existence, the wizarding world walks straight into Wi-Fi, smartphones, and social media, which, if you've been paying attention, are way scarier than one snake-obsessed fascist. 9/11 reshaped Muggle security and surveillance. Wars, drones, and global intelligence sharing meant unexplained explosions and vanishing buildings started getting archived from 12 angles. Pandemics made every government obsessed with disease control while St. Mungo's quietly cured dragon pox in a weekend. Climate chaos ripped open hidden habitats, satellites and rockets poked holes in the sky above every unplottable charm, and Google Earth politely said, unplottable to who, exactly. So let's start with a promise. By the end of this video, you'll know 24 specific Muggle events that quietly broke the wizarding world, how the Ministry scrambled to keep up, and why Hogwarts surviving Voldemort ended up being the easy part. For now, let's celebrate the last peaceful moment before that TikTok went live. Because after this night, magic isn't hiding from Muggles anymore. It's hiding from the algorithm. So let's lock in where we actually are. The Battle of Hogwarts wraps in May 1998. Voldemort is dust, the wands stop screaming, and Harry finally gets to sleep without a homicidal snake man in his dreams. The epilogue jumps us to 2017. Kids on platform 9 3/4. Everyone pretending they aged gracefully. But the timeline we care about? It starts the second the war ends in 1998 and just keeps going. Right alongside our world. Because while Harry is learning how to do paperwork in the Auror office, Muggles are busy. You've got the internet going from weird dial-up toy to global brain, real-world wars from 9/11 to Iraq to Afghanistan, entire governments rewriting surveillance laws, and climate disasters stacking up like Hogwarts detentions. All of that is happening off-page, which, if you've been paying attention, means the wizarding world is getting absolutely steamrolled by stuff it never prepared for. So what actually counts as a Muggle event here? We're talking the big headline moments. Wars, terrorism, tech booms, pandemics, climate chaos, and space races. Anything where Muggles change how they live so dramatically that magical governments have to react, adapt, or quietly panic behind 12 layers of wards. Think smartphones putting a camera in every hand, satellites mapping every inch of Earth, COVID-style pandemics racing around the globe, and rockets casually yeeting metal into orbit above Hogwarts. If you're wondering whether wizards can just wave a wand and ignore all that, yeah, take a moment. The core question of this video is not, could wizards stop these events? Because sure, you could apparate an aura into a war zone or obliviate a general. That's boring. The real question is, how did these events quietly shred the International Statute of Secrecy, stress test magical law, and drag the wizarding world into the 21st century kicking and screaming? When 3% of the planet is online in 1998, and over half is online now, your old unplottable charms start looking like Windows 95 security. So here's how we're doing this. We've picked 24 major Muggle events from 1998 onward. Each one is its own little story. Quick setup of what actually happened in our world. A canon-consistent wizarding reaction, built from what we know about the Ministry, Hogwarts, and international magical law, and then a slightly unhinged commentary button at the end. Think, what if Kingsley had to testify in front of the UN Energy? For now, let's celebrate that you're about to watch the wizarding world suffer from things as mundane as Wi-Fi passwords. We will get to 9/11 and the Iraq War, to smartphones turning every corridor into a potential evidence locker, to COVID smashing into St. Mungo's, to climate change exposing merpeople, dragons, and giants. Yes, Elon Musk absolutely ends up pinging Hogwarts with a satellite. Couldn't have happened to a nicer guy. But let's start with the moment the internet stops being a toy and becomes an existential crisis for magic. Event number 1. The internet explosion, when owls lost their jobs. The moment magic met dial-up. That screeching, haunted modem noise, that's basically the sound of the Statute of Secrecy cracking. Late 90s, early 2000s, chunky beige computers, CRT monitors that could kill a house elf if they toppled, and Muggles suddenly sending messages faster than an owl could flap across Hogsmeade? Yeah, take a moment. Let's start with how unbelievably smug the Ministry had been up to this point. For centuries, a magical mishap was a local problem. One exploding teapot, one confused Muggle, one quick obliviator visit, done. Clean, quiet, controlled. But then Muggles invent email, instant messaging, digital cameras, early webcams, and suddenly you don't just have one witness. You have a witness who can copy a photo infinitely and send it to 1,000 people before an aura's even put on their boots. If you're wondering when the panic really starts, picture some poor wizard kid in 1999 casting a Patronus in their bedroom because they're homesick, while their cousin is testing out a brand new webcam. That glowing stag gets recorded, uploaded to some cursed early message board, mirrored, downloaded, printed, and laughed at in 3 countries before anyone in the improper use of magic office has finished their tea. What used to be a memory charm and a stern lecture is now an international PR nightmare. Inside the Ministry, it turns into a generational cage match. Old purebloods in fraying dragonhide boots are leaning back like, electricity doesn't work around us, we're fine. Muggles can't even keep a television running near a squib, which, if you've been paying attention, is technically true inside a heavy magic field. And completely useless when the problem is a Muggle teenager in Manchester posting grainy broomstick footage from 3 miles away. The younger half-bloods, they're storming in with stacks of printed forum threads and early viral videos, basically screaming, look, they have moving pictures now. They don't even need portraits. Apparently this freak-out isn't just British. The International Confederation of Wizards quietly spins up something that sounds wildly boring and is actually terrifying. The Digital Anomalies Task Force. A secret squad of witches and wizards whose entire job is to lurk on Muggle forums, UFO sites, and conspiracy boards, mass report real magic clips, and aggressively call everything bad Photoshop or camera glitches. They're the ones who popularize phrases like grainy footage, obvious hoax, and nice try, dude. Together with a few well-placed Confundus charms on early tech journalists, they basically gaslight the entire internet. And while all of this is happening, while the wizarding world is losing its mind over Yahoo, Groups and webcams, Harry Potter's at the Burrow trying to figure out what a rubber duck is actually for. Somewhere in a Ravenclaw dorm in 2001, a Muggle born with a Nokia brick is quietly discovering you can get 1 bar of signal near the owlery window. Hogwarts is about to get its first underground tech ring, and the real chaos hasn't even started. While that Ravenclaw is hunting for 1 bar of signal, Muggle newsrooms are about to light up with something way louder than dial-up. Let's start with a date you probably know a little too well from history class, 11th September 2001. Picture the ministry break room, beige walls, sad sandwiches, a tiny Muggle TV one of the Muggle-borns smuggled in for football. Then the first plane hits. A couple of people flinch. By the second plane, every Muggle-born in the room has gone completely silent because they know exactly what this means for the wizarding world. Muggle governments are about to go full paranoid. Yeah. Take a moment. If you're wondering why wizards would care about Muggle planes, look at what came after. Airport security goes from take off your shoes to empty your soul. No-fly lists explode. Intelligence agencies suddenly build entire task forces for unexplained anomalies, weird radar blips, creatures on night vision, random people apparating a little too close to Heathrow, which, if you've been paying attention, is literally the kind of mess the ministry usually cleans up with 1 bored obliviator and a stack of falsified reports. Kingsley Shacklebolt, now minister, gets dragged into emergency meetings with the Muggle prime minister so often he basically has a standing appointment. Downing Street is running on terror alerts and red folders. The wizarding side is running on please don't discover dragons. Quiet agreements start appearing. If an incident looks like terrorism but smells like a rogue rumpant, the ministry steps in. If a Death Eater remnant decides to play copycat with explosions, the Muggles get tipped off just enough to blame it on conventional weapons and go back to arguing about oil. Meanwhile, the Obliviator, headquarters, completely reinvented overnight. They're not just wiping memories in back alleys anymore. They're scrubbing CCTV footage frame by frame so some MI5 analyst doesn't freeze frame a house elf in HD. They're intercepting digital records, hacking hospital databases the Muggle way and the magical way, and quietly losing any file where a survivor swears the bomb roared like a dragon. Every time a Muggle investigator gets too close to a magical cause, someone from the ministry accidentally steers them toward a much more boring, entirely non-dragon-related explanation. Look, nobody was surprised when all that new surveillance made the Statute of Secrecy feel about as solid as Filch's authority. Satellites, email dragnets, phone taps. Muggles basically built a giant sneakoscope around the planet and then cranked it to 11. And 9/11 is just the opening act. Because the real nightmare for the ministry isn't one day in New York. It's what comes after. Long wars in deserts and mountains, soldiers stumbling into wards ancient wizards forgot about, black sites built right on top of cursed ground, and magical creatures wandering into live fire zones. Magic and Muggle weapons are about to share a battlefield, and the fallout from that? We'll get to that later. Event number 3, the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Horrors in the crossfire. Magic and Muggle warfare sharing a battlefield. Yeah. Take a moment. Because after 9/11, when the US and UK invaded Afghanistan and then Iraq, the wizarding world didn't just sit back with a cup of tea and the prophet crossword. You've got years of occupation, drone strikes, night raids, and suddenly the desert sky is full of strange lights and unexplained explosions that are not all Muggle. Let's start with the geopolitical chaos you already know. Convoys getting hit, villages flattened, cities changing hands every few months. Which, if you've been paying attention, is also the perfect recipe for UFO sightings, ghost stories on military forums, and grainy helmet cam footage of something way too big moving in the smoke. Muggle governments blame tech glitches and insurgents. The ICW looks at the same footage and goes, cool, that's a manticore. Because here's the part nobody in the Muggle news mentions. Iraq and Afghanistan already had magical communities. Old, wandless traditions that make British spellwork look like children playing dress-up. Hidden mountain enclaves where witches have been doing protective magic since before Hogwarts was a rock. Families that brew healing concoctions for both wizards and Muggles, and never write anything down. Then the bombs start falling. Forests burn. Caves collapse. Ancient wards crack. Dragons that were nesting in remote ranges get driven straight into live fire zones. Manticores wander toward the only water source left, which just happens to be a NATO base. A terrified squad of soldiers sees something with a human face and a scorpion tail walk through a minefield untouched and live to post about it later. If you're wondering where the Aurors are in all this, the answer is way closer than the Ministry wants, printed in any history book. Under the cover of international cooperation, British and European Aurors get quietly seconded to an ICW task force. Their job? Extract magical families before they're wiped out, patch up shattered wards on centuries-old shrines, and relocate dragons away from drone surveillance that records in HD. Obliviators become unofficial support staff for Muggle PTSD. Field teams trail medical units, waiting for the moment a half-conscious soldier mutters about a giant horned creature walking through a wall of fire. Wipe the memory, tweak the footage, send a doctored file back through 10 layers of Muggle intelligence agencies that already don't trust each other. And inside the wizarding world, the moral fight is brutal. Younger Aurors who grew up on stories of Dumbledore and Grindelwald argue that if you can stop a massacre with one shield charm, how do you justify not doing it? Wizengamot purists fire back that magical interference in Muggle wars is literally how you get Dark Lords with fan clubs. Kingsley Shacklebolt, who thought Voldemort was the peak of his stress, ends up taking late-night flu calls from Cobble. A field leader is like, "Minister, a basilisk skeleton just got unearthed under a runway, and 3 geologists are already measuring the fangs." Kingsley has to keep NATO from weaponizing basilisk venom, calm the ICW, and convince a room full of British traditionalists that no, they cannot just memory charm the entire Middle East. Look, nobody was surprised when he started going gray. And the worst part? Iraq and Afghanistan are only the beginning of modern wars colliding with magic. The next crises won't just be in deserts and mountains, they'll be in the cloud, on satellites, and in every smartphone pointed at the sky. Event number 4, CCTV everywhere, the death of the clean getaway. If you think war was bad for the Statute of Secrecy, wait until you remember what Muggles did right after. They pointed cameras at literally everything. Let's start with early 2000s London, post 9/11, post-tube bombings. The British government basically said, what if Big Brother, but in real life, and covered the city in CCTV. Street corners, buses, train platforms, corner shops. Exactly the places wizards used to casually disapparate like they were nipping to the loo. Before this, a witch could duck into an alley, twist, and vanish. Maybe one confused Muggle would blink and go, must have been the wind. After CCTV, that same apparition is now recorded in grainy black and white from 3 angles, time-stamped, and burned onto a hard drive in a police station where, unfortunately, obliviators do not have keycard access. Picture it. A drunk wizard leaving the leaky cauldron the wrong way, staggers into a Tesco car park, spins, and apparates home. To him, it's Tuesday. To the Muggle security guard reviewing footage, it's a man teleporting between parking spaces. 3 cameras catch it. 1 gets the pop, 1 gets the spin. 1 gets the empty space where he used to be. Yeah. Take a moment. And it's not just wizards. A house elf assigned to discreetly tail a Muggle-born politician miscalculates, pops into existence right behind a live BBC reporter, and straight into the 6 o'clock news. Somewhere else, a bored teenager hacks into traffic cams and posts a clip of what looks suspiciously like a broomstick streaking through the sky in night vision. If you're wondering, yes, the Muggle comments are all fake, CGI, and my uncle works for NASA. The problem is volume. 1 weird clip is a joke. 10,000 weird clips start to look like a pattern. The ministry's response? Panic. Then bureaucracy. Then very nerdy magic. Runespore-level committees cook up experimental anti-recording charms that don't stop cameras from working, but quietly corrupt anything with magical signatures. On film, spells smear into static. Apparition pops become dropped frames. Creatures register as motion blur and bad autofocus. It's like someone cast potato vision on half the CCTV network. Of course, charms fail. Batteries don't. So Kingsley signs off on a new generation of obliviators who are less kindly nurse and more Black Ops IT. These people learn how to infiltrate Muggle police evidence rooms, wipe tapes, hack digital archives with enchanted USB sticks, and memory charm anyone who asks too many questions about the teleporting guy. The Wizarding world and the Muggle surveillance state end up in this bizarre, low-key Cold War, which, if you've been paying attention, is exactly the kind of thing the old ministry was absolutely not built for. Every time Muggles upgrade from grainy CCTV to HD to 4K to we can zoom in on a pigeon's guilty conscience, Wizards have to upgrade their concealment spells. New wards, new distortion fields, new please look anywhere but here. Enchantments layered over cities like magical ad block. And if cameras on the ground are already this bad for clean getaways, what happens when Muggles stop pointing them at streets and start pointing them at the entire planet from space? We'll get to that later. So remember how we just talked about CCTV and smartphones? Cute, local problem, manageable. Then Muggles collectively decided that wasn't enough and pointed cameras at the entire planet. From space, while eating cereal. Yeah. Take a moment. Let's start with Google Earth and Friends. Early 2000s, a bored teenager in Ohio can zoom from their math homework to some random patch of Scottish Highlands in 3 clicks. No night bus, no port key, just vibes and a scroll wheel. If you're wondering when the Department of Magical Transportation started stress drinking tea, it's right about here, because one junior clerk doing a routine Muggle tech sweep spots it. On an early satellite composite buried in the grainy pixels of northern Scotland, there's a suspicious castle-shaped blur. Tall towers. Lake nearby, no Muggle records, no tourist brochures, and it's not on any official map. Which, if you've been paying attention, is exactly the problem. Hogwarts is supposed to be unplottable. You can't find it on a map. You can't just stumble across it. That protection worked great when mapping meant a guy with a compass and a bad attitude. But when you've got high-resolution satellites, military imaging, and Muggle companies casually updating global maps every few days, unplottable suddenly has to mean ungoogleable too. Q panic. Emergency meetings. Somebody definitely shouting, "What do you mean a Muggle corporation has a better view of the Forbidden Forest than we do?" The department ends up working with the Department of Mysteries to upgrade everything. Stronger Muggle-repelling charms. New wards that don't just confuse human eyes, but actively spoof digital sensors. Enchantments that overwrite the image with an illusory landscape. Where there should be a castle, satellites now see a slightly boring, aggressively average hill. And when the spells misfire, you get those weird glitched squares and smeared pixels on online maps that conspiracy theorists obsess over. Top secret military base, they say. Sure, Wizards reply while a hippogriff is literally grazing underneath the blur. Speaking of high-security nightmares, Azkaban becomes a massive problem. No Dementors anymore, but you still really don't want Muggle analysts asking why an empty patch of ocean keeps showing strange shadows and sudden fog banks on every satellite pass. The International Confederation of Wizards quietly leans on multiple ministries to coordinate global anti-satellite charms over certain coordinates, like a magical no-fly zone in orbit. If a camera looks at Azkaban, it sees open water. If a rocket flies overhead, its sensors mysteriously glitch. SpaceX would have questions. Pattern interrupt time. Cut to a modern Muggle YouTuber, ring light on, dramatic thumbnail face, doing a top 10 places Google Earth won't show you video. Number 4. A weirdly blurred patch of mountains in Eastern Europe. He zooms in, circles it in red, calls it a secret bunker. Smash cut to the exact same coordinates in the Wizarding world, where a Hungarian horntail is napping on a cliff, tail twitching every time the satellite passes. For now, let's celebrate that the upgraded charms mostly work. But as satellites get sharper and Muggles start aiming cameras beyond Earth altogether, the Wizarding world has to ask a terrifying question. What happens when the next big discovery isn't on a map, but on Mars? We'll get to that later. Event number 6, smartphones, the pocket sneakoscope from hell. If satellites were the slow, ominous threat, smartphones were the jump scare. One day magic is dodging telescopes. The next, every Muggle is walking around with a tiny glass sneakoscope that records in 4K and uploads your mistakes to billions of people before an obliviator can even find their wand. Let's start with the early days. Late 90s, early 2000s, you've got chunky Nokias and grainy flip phones that made everything look like it was filmed through a dirty potion vial. The Ministry wasn't panicking yet because any blurry shot of a broom in the distance could be written off as bad weather or your haunted thumb. But then cameras got sharper, smartphones hit. Suddenly that weird light in the sky over Manchester? A kid zooms in, stabilizes, and accidentally captures a full-blown broom chase between two idiot amateur Quidditch players who forgot clouds exist. And that's just the warm-up. A bored teenager films a TikTok in a haunted Victorian alley, doing the classic shaky cam, fake scream routine. In the background, if you've been paying attention, a cloaked wizard apparates with the loudest crack imaginable right into frame. The video goes viral overnight, because apparently the internet loves glitch in the matrix content almost as much as it loves cat videos. Comment sections turn into mass speculation about ghosts, aliens, government experiments, and that one guy insisting it's definitely Slender Man. Look, nobody was surprised when the Ministry finally freaked out. Global internet use shot from almost nobody in 1998 to billions of people posting everything, all the time. You can't just quietly obliviate one cameraman anymore when 5 different tourists have already live-streamed the same accidental Patronus on 3 platforms. So Kingsley's reformed ministry writes new laws. No active Muggle devices in high magic zones. If you're going into a dragon reserve, a major raid, or anywhere near a Quidditch pitch, your phone gets confunded, charmed off, or locked in a warded box that would make Gringotts jealous. Specialized charms pop up that temporarily brick electronics in a radius during operations, like magical EMPs. Great for secrecy. Slightly less great when some poor Muggle hiker's phone dies right as they're trying to load Google Maps. And because the wizarding world can't code but can definitely lurk, the Auror office ends up with a new job nobody trained for. Social media scrolling. Young Aurors, fresh out of Hogwarts, get assigned to sit in a cramped office and doomscroll Twitter, TikTok, Reddit, YouTube, all day, flagging anything that looks a little too close to the truth. Haunted Scottish castle lights up at midnight? Routine. Giant lizard flying over rural Romania? Tail on fire? That one gets escalated. For now, let's celebrate that most of those clips can still be debunked with a few clever charms, a planted VFX breakdown, and some very persuasive Muggle influencers. But remember that Hungarian horntail from earlier? Yeah, take a moment. Because the day one dragon sighting goes so viral that even magic can't bury it, is closer than anyone in the ministry wants to admit. And when that horntail finally breaks the internet, the Statute of Secrecy isn't the only thing that starts to crack. Event number 7. Social media. Virality. When obliviate isn't enough, that crack? It's Wi-Fi. Because once the internet shows up, the Statute of Secrecy isn't fighting dark wizards anymore. It's fighting bored teenagers with unlimited data. Let's start with how fast one tiny post can explode. A 6th form kid in Wales films that horntail streaking across the sky on a cracked Android. They've got, 73 followers? They post it with, "Yo, WTF is this?" and go to bed. By the time they wake up, it's been screen recorded to TikTok, stolen for 3 different YouTube compilations, turned into a dragon over Cardiff meme, and uploaded to 5 conspiracy subreddits. Reaction channels are pausing every frame. Some guy in Brazil is enhancing it. Someone in Japan has already drawn fan art. Now drop the ministry into that. An Obliviator team pops in, wipes the kid and their parents, scrubs the original phone. Job done, right? Look, nobody was surprised that this used to work in 1994. But in a world where over half the planet is online and every app auto-saves to the cloud, the original file is the least of your problems. The video's been mirrored, stitched, duetted, downloaded, and re-uploaded so many times that even if you confunded half of Europe, a backup is still sitting on some server farm in California. If you're wondering what Kingsley's sleep paralysis demon looks like, it's a grainy 15-second clip of a werewolf transformation, slowed down to 0.25x speed with red circles and arrows, titled Real. That's the Ministry's nightmare. They obliviate the original hiker who filmed it in rural Poland. But the footage is already living rent-free on a Russian message board, a Reddit thread, and 3 private Discord servers full of people who think wands are just advanced tasers. This is where the ICW has to go full international digital containment. Secret treaties, emergency protocols, and magical infiltration of major tech companies. A couple of security engineers in Silicon Valley who just happen to be very good at memory charms. Quiet deals with content moderation teams, so anything tagged real magic, dragon sighting, or mermaid in canal gets throttled into oblivion. The wizarding world basically invents magical shadow banning, which, if you've been paying attention, opens a massive ethical can of flobberworms. Because now, some random Muggle creator finally has their big viral moment, and a ministry task force decides their career is illegal. That girl whose channel blows up after she accidentally films a werewolf in Romania? Her views flatline overnight. The urban explorer who catches an abandoned London building that's actually a warded ministry entrance? Every upload starts failing to process. They think the algorithm hates them. In reality, it's 3 unspeakables and a cursed server rack. And the irony? The wizarding world that once ran on gossip, whisper networks, and the Daily Prophet now lives in absolute terror of a vertical 15-second clip captioned, "Yo, WTF is this?" going live during peak engagement. For now, let's celebrate that it's mostly dragons and werewolves. Because the moment Muggle cameras catch something bigger than a stray creature, the ministry's problems get way more existential. And then nature basically said, "Oh, you're worried about dragon TikToks? Cute." Because the next thing that hits the wizarding world isn't a creature leak. It's the ocean. Let's start with December 26, 2004. Massive undersea earthquake. The Indian Ocean lights up every seismograph on the planet. A wall of water tears through Indonesia, Sri Lanka, India, Thailand, and more. Whole coastlines erased in minutes. From day one, you've got 24/7 global news, helicopters, live reporters on beaches, and satellites tracking everything from orbit. No foggy Daily Prophet headline you can quietly memory charm later. This is high-definition, multi-angle Muggle attention. And buried in those coastlines, hidden magical communities that were never supposed to see sunlight. If you're wondering where mer people live when they're not haunting Hogwarts' lake, a lot of them are in deep offshore colonies, tied to reefs and trench systems. Those reefs get shredded. Underwater wards buckle. Entire merfolk cities end up exposed in suddenly shallow, debris-filled water, while Muggle Navy ships and rescue divers swarm the area. Selkies and other shape-shifting sea beings have it just as bad. Their rocky coves in places like Sri Lanka and the Andaman Islands are literally ripped open. One minute you're a grumpy Selkie sunning in your secret inlet. The next minute a tourist with a camcorder is screaming because a half-human, half-seal just washed up next to their overturned fishing boat. And it's not just creatures. You've also got tiny coastal wizard enclaves, especially in South and Southeast Asia, that rely on old tidal magic and concealment charms. Those protections are built for storms and nosy fishermen, not a once-in-centuries mega tsunami being filmed from space. Entire villages are flattened or shifted, which, if you've been paying attention, is a nightmare for unplottable locations. Suddenly, a lost wizard village is sitting exactly where Muggle search teams are airdropping food. The ICW goes into full emergency mode. International port key corridors get set up in record time, shunting magical evacuees from devastated beaches to safe houses in places like Bhutan, inland India, even old European strongholds. Healers from St. Mungo's and Mahutukoro quietly embed themselves in overwhelmed Muggle hospitals, slipping in diagnostic charms, blood-replenishing potions, and accelerated bone mending under the cover of miracle recoveries. At the same time, entire task forces are sprinting along the coasts, stunners and disillusionment charms flying, just to keep Kelpies, Grindylows, and panicked merfolk off live news cameras. And this is where the real fracture starts. Younger witches and wizards, the ones who grew up on stories of Voldemort and watched Harry's generation risk everything for all lives, Look at this disaster and say, we're really gonna hide while thousands of Muggles drown on live TV? Again? They start pushing to drop the act, to send visible magical aid, to stop pretending the statute matters more than human lives. Older officials respond with the classic ministry energy. A lot of meetings, a lot of memos, and absolutely no courage. The compromise is ugly. Quiet help, no open reveals, and a massive, guilty awareness that they could have done more. Yeah. Take a moment, because this isn't a one-off. The tsunami is the first giant red flag that a warming planet is going to keep throwing bigger storms, higher seas, and collapsing ecosystems at both worlds together. And the next time the water rises, it's not just beaches and coral kingdoms on the line. It's entire magical climates starting to melt. We'll get to that later. Event number 9. Climate change, melting ice, angry dragons, and drowning charms. So, when the water rises again, it's not just about flooded beaches and soggy seaside cottages. It's about entire magical climates coming apart at the seams. Let's start with the dragons. Because of course the world ends in fire-breathing climate anxiety. The Romanian and Hungarian reserves are in trouble. Summers stretch longer, snowpacks vanish, and those icy cliff nests you remember from Goblet of Fire? They're literally crumbling. Female horntails can't lay eggs in rock that keeps sliding off the mountain, and prey animals are migrating uphill, then running out of hill. Meanwhile, in Asia, Yeti territories shrink as glaciers retreat, pushing them down toward Muggle trekking routes. If you're wondering how long you can obliviate an entire tourist industry, the answer is not forever. Underwater, it's worse. Mer-people cities built around cold, deep currents suddenly face warming water and shifting tides. Whole kelp forests die off. Coral reefs bleach, and ancient mirror-constructed wards that assumed stable sea levels start failing. Some colonies have to abandon statues that have stood since before Hogwarts existed, because the currents that powered their magic literally moved. Climate data makes hiding harder too. Muggle scientists are tracking everything: bird migrations, forest health, ocean temperatures. When whole herds of unicorns quietly move north, satellite collars on nearby deer show bizarre patterns. When centaur herds shift their forest range, Muggle botanists log unexplained changes in undergrowth and soil composition. And those weird, localized storm fronts that happen to follow dragon migrations? Meteorologists have charts. They compare decades. The anomalies line up a little too neatly. Inside the Ministry and the International Confederation of Wizards, the arguments get ugly. Do they start nudging Muggle climate policy, arranging lucky elections, suspiciously well-timed scandals, and sudden bursts of public support for green laws? Or do they throw up their hands and say, fine, we'll just adapt magically? That means mass port keys to move entire species, experimental stasis charms on shrinking ice fields, and gigantic, continent-spanning weather wards that make every unspeakable's eye twitch. Pattern interrupt. Picture this: a furious, elderly Hungarian horntail being airlifted out of a half-melted mountain bowl by a fleet of enchanted hot air balloons. Ministry handlers dangling underneath, screaming into wind-muffling charms while the dragon roars and tries to set the balloons on fire. Yeah. Take a moment. Some poor intern has to file that as routine habitat relocation. At the same time, a quieter strategy appears. Joint magical Muggle conservation projects, dressed up as perfectly normal research grants. A biodiversity hotspot gets emergency protection status because it allegedly hosts rare butterflies, while the real reason is a unicorn herd that's been there since the 1200s. A forest in Eastern Europe receives international funding for old-growth preservation, which, if you've been paying attention, is code for please don't bulldoze the Centaur Council headquarters. Wizards end up in back rooms of Muggle universities, quietly steering climate models, redirecting field studies, and charming satellite data to blur certain clearings. It's the first time the wizarding world has to play long-term global politics with Muggles, and nobody can just wave a wand and be done. And the more they intervene, the closer they skate to breaking the statute in a way you can't obliviate away. Because once you start tweaking entire governments, what happens when Muggle wars move into those same protected zones? We'll get to that later. And speaking of Muggles breaking things they don't even know exist, let's start with the moment the entire non-magical economy face-planted. Event 10, the 2008 global financial crisis. Housing bubble pops, dodgy loans explode, massive banks collapse, markets nosedive, and suddenly Muggle money is a chaotic soup of panic and regret. Yeah, take a moment. If you're wondering why goblins would care about some Muggle mortgage in Surrey, remember, Gringotts is not just a dragon, a trolley, and a vault full of Weasley hand-me-downs. For decades, goblins have quietly run exchange services for Muggleborns and half-bloods, turning pounds and dollars into galleons and back again. That means they track Muggle currencies, they shadow Muggle gold markets, and they absolutely know when the non-magical world sets itself on financial fire. And goblins, being goblins, didn't stop at a currency board. They've got deep positions in precious metals, rare gemstones, and, very occasionally, a discreet stake in a Muggle institution whose board thinks they're dealing with a very old, very private family bank in Switzerland. They love gold because it's stable, shiny, and you can drop it on someone's head. What's not to like? So when 2008 hits and Muggle banks start dropping faster than Lockhart's memory, the first goblin reaction is pure smug. Look, nobody was surprised. They've been telling wizards for centuries that Muggles build their wealth on promises and paper. Goblins prefer vaults and things you can bite. For about 3 weeks, every goblin in Diagon Alley walks around like, "See? Told you, paper is a joke." Then gold prices spike, Muggle currencies wobble. Some of those, totally safe, nobody will ever look here. Shell companies and backdoor arrangements, they end up in Muggle regulatory investigations, conspiracy blogs, and late-night TV rants about shadowy banks hoarding real wealth. Which, if you've been paying attention, is uncomfortably close to there is a literal underground goblin-run fortress full of gold beneath London. Now the Ministry starts sweating. Economic instability makes Muggles obsessed with invisible money, hidden reserves, and secret elites pulling strings. Sound familiar? It's like the entire Muggle world collectively decides to LARP Mad-Eye Moody Spots Gringotts. You've got journalists tracing gold flows, governments stress-testing banks, and internet forums drawing maps that accidentally get too close to Diagon Alley's foundations. The Department of International Magical Cooperation has to coordinate with the Muggle Liaison Office just to keep some frantic finance minister from demanding an audit of every institution in the city. Kingsley's people are patching memory charms over panicked whistleblowers, deleting CCTV of goblin couriers, and quietly nudging Muggle regulators away from certain vault numbers. And in the middle of all this, imagine a tense, oak-paneled meeting where a goblin account manager is forced to explain what a collateralized debt obligation is to a horrified senior wizard who still thinks compound interest is basically dark magic. So you bundle cursed promises, sell them, then pretend they're fine? The goblin just blinks. You fought Voldemort! And this is what disturbs you? For now, let's celebrate that this was the first time wizards realized Muggle chaos could threaten Gringotts without a single curse being cast. But what happens when the next crisis isn't about money, it's about cameras catching actual magic? So cameras catching magic are bad. But what about cameras catching explosions? While ministry workers are literally on the train? Let's start with 7 July 2005. In Muggle history, it's the London bombings. In Wizarding history, it's the day the Ministry realized the Underground isn't just a slightly grimy portkey waiting room. You had junior Aurors, Department of Mysteries interns, even a couple of Goblin liaison officers using the tube that morning because, apparently, not everyone has a fireplace in central London. When the first bomb went off, half a dozen enchanted briefcases screamed to life. Emergency portkeys, keyed to life-threatening event. They activated mid-tunnel. People vanished off CCTV, leaving scorch marks, dropped Oyster cards, and one very confused Muggle conductor who swore a woman turned into blue smoke. If you're wondering, yes, Obliviators were down there within minutes, trying to work around bomb squads, paramedics, and about 1,000 armed police. The chaos was unreal. Muggle responders assumed every weird effect was shrapnel or smoke inhalation. Magical responders assumed every weird effect might be dark magic piggybacking on the blast. One healer from St. Mungo's apparated into a tunnel, saw a Muggle defibrillator, and thought it was a cursed box trying to restart hearts by force. Yeah, take a moment. After that, transport hubs became a nightmare for secrecy. The Muggle world ramped up CCTV, bag checks, anti-terror patrols, the works. Which, if you've been paying attention, is basically a worst-case scenario for wizards who like to pop in and out of King's Cross like it's a revolving door. Flu connections near major stations got throttled. Port keys into city centers needed 3 levels of approval and a full cover story. Apparition anywhere near a camera, logged, tracked, and if it set off electromagnetic anomalies, you got an angry memo from both the Auror office and some poor unspeakable, who had to explain mystical interference to a Muggle telecom analyst. So the Ministry and the Muggle government did something radical. They talked. Together they set up joint protocols. Any unexplained blast, gas leak, or structural failure inside London now triggers 2 parallel investigations. One Muggle, one magical. The idea is simple. No more mislabeling magical accidents as terrorism, and no more assuming every suspicious fireball is just a faulty boiler. Emotionally, though, Muggleborns got crushed in the middle. They're riding the tube with their parents who are terrified of terror alerts, while also getting ministry notices about heightened security for magical transit. Both worlds feel under siege, and only one of them is allowed to be talked about at family dinner. Try explaining you're late because your port key rerouted to avoid a Muggle anti-terror drill, and this blending of fear and secrecy is just getting started. Because what happens when the next crisis isn't a bomb in a tunnel? It's a virus in a lab? When Muggle biolabs, pandemics, and one very specific global outbreak slam into St. Mungo's, and the one time they could have saved millions, they were ordered to stand down, we'll get to that later. Event to Remark 12. SARS, bird flu, and the prequel to a pandemic. Let's start with the early 2000s, when Muggles started treating airports like low-budget apothecaries. Face masks, temperature guns, hand sanitizer, everywhere. SARS in 2003, bird flu, swine flu, rolling news banners, screaming about outbreaks every 5 minutes. You had travel advisories, grounded flights, and panicked interviews with experts who definitely hadn't slept in 3 days. But notice what didn't happen. No full global shutdown yet. No, everyone stay home forever, good luck with your sourdough starter. Life limped on. Sports kept going, schools mostly stayed open, and the wizarding world watched the Muggle news like, Visinui Vedis. Wow, rough flu season. Anyway, back to dragonpox. Because if you're wondering how magical Britain handles disease, they're weirdly competent and weirdly arrogant at the same time. You've got St. Mungo's, a literal skyscraper of magical medicine hidden in London, staffed by specialized healers who treat everything from vanishing bones to cursed opals. Magical quarantines are old hat. They've ring-fenced outbreaks of dragonpox, spattergroit, and that one cursed broomstick flu that made everyone levitate during sneezes. They have wards that detect contagion, potions that shred fevers in hours, and charms that sterilize entire wards faster than a Muggle can say, antibacterial wipe. Wizards have been dealing with lycanthropy, cursed bloodlines, and goblin-transmitted illnesses for centuries. So, when Muggle news starts screaming about SARS, a lot of purebloods just shrug. Look, nobody was surprised that the Ministry's official stance became Muggle problems, Muggle solutions. In closed-door meetings, pureblood traditionalists literally argued that magic naturally filters Muggle pathogens. They cite vague anecdotes about Spanish flu barely touching wizarding communities, and some uncle's story about surviving the Black Death because his great-great-grandmother brewed a garlic potion. Zero data. Zero peer review. Just vibes. Which, if you've been paying attention, is exactly how the wizarding world likes to operate. Tradition over testing, rumor over research. It worked just well enough to be dangerous. But not everyone bought it. A handful of forward-thinking healers at St. Mungo's, especially Muggle-born Medi-Wizards, start getting nervous. They're watching Muggle virologists on TV, hearing words like mutation, zoonotic spillover, airborne transmission, and they're connecting some very uncomfortable dots. If a virus can jump from bats to humans, what about from measles to humans? From dragons? From whatever is living in the Forbidden Forest that Hagrid calls mostly harmless? Quietly, in back offices and after hours, they start studying Muggle virology, borrowed textbooks, smuggled journals, enchanted microscopes trying to see what magic usually ignores. One healer compares dragonpox particles to images of H5N1 and goes very still. Another notices that certain shielding charms behave oddly around viral samples. Is it protection or pressure? We'll get to that later. For now, let's celebrate the Ministry's favorite move, pretending a problem doesn't exist until it explodes. Cut to 2009. A young Muggle-born healer in a cramped St. Mungo's office snaps shut a thick Muggle medical textbook about influenza. They rub their eyes, glance at a memo from the Department of Magical Health, saying, "No credible risk of Muggle magical cross-contamination," and mutter, "It's probably fine." Yeah. Take a moment, because the next time that book would have mattered, 2020. And the word the Wizarding world ended up saying was basically, oops. Event number 13, COVID-19, the pandemic that cornered the Statute of Secrecy. Let's start with the moment the Wizarding world's favorite excuse, Muggles won't notice, completely exploded. It's 2020. Streets are empty, planes are grounded, hospitals are overflowing, and every Muggle on Earth is locked indoors, glued to their phone, their laptop, and 3 different streaming services at once. If you're wondering what that does to the Statute of Secrecy, the answer is nothing good. Governments are begging for any cure, any miracle, any half-credible rumor about a miracle. Conspiracy forums are melting down. People are sharing garlic tea recipes like they're ancient magic. And somewhere, in a very tense International Confederation of Wizards meeting, somebody has to say out loud, "We actually do have potions that could fix a lot of this." Yeah. Take a moment. Inside the Wizarding world, COVID is a completely different story. St. Mungo's, already used to dragonpox, spattergroid, and whatever unhinged thing Fred and George left behind, moves fast. Healers brew targeted antiviral drafts, tweak pepper-up potions, and slap quarantine charms on entire wards. Magical epidemiologists track transmission with enchanted maps that light up like a Christmas tree anytime an infected wizard apparates. It's messy for a month, then it's contained. And that's where the real horror starts. Because containment for wizards means watching Muggles die on the news, while your own numbers flatline. Muggle-born healers, especially the ones who went into medicine on both sides, are wrecked. Imagine being a witch working as a Muggle ICU nurse by day, then fluing to St. Mungo's at night where one potion and a charm clear the same symptoms in minutes. You go home, your dad is coughing in the next room, and the Ministry is saying, "You cannot intervene." The pressure campaign begins. Quiet memos, heated flu calls. A coalition of Muggle-borns and half-bloods argue for limited disclosure, controlled trials, mysterious anonymous donors, funding hospitals, maybe a single hybrid task force. The pure-blood traditionalists panic because if Muggles learn that wizards held out on a global pandemic, that's not just a statute violation, that's a war crime waiting to happen. Meanwhile, secrecy itself turns into a practical nightmare. With everyone stuck at home, any weird flash of light outside the window is instantly filmed, uploaded, and dissected by 10 million bored people on TikTok. A bored second year tries a Patronus in the backyard? Congratulations, you've just created real ghost stag caught on camera with 40 million views, which, if you've been paying attention, is the Wizarding world's worst-case scenario. Infinite Muggle cameras and infinite free time, and with cities quiet, wildlife wanders back in. Regular foxes? Sure. But also the occasional confused Kneasel, a disoriented Puffskein, and one very lost Welsh green swooping too low over a lockdown town before handlers drag it back. Every clip gets labeled CGI, until patterns start to emerge. So the question hanging over this entire era is brutal. Did the Wizarding world let millions die to protect the Statute of Secrecy? And if the answer is yes, how long before one overworked, heartbroken healer decides that obeying the law is the real crime and breaks ranks for good? Event number 14. Modern medicine versus magic. Cures, vaccines, and lycanthropy. That healer who breaks ranks? They don't run to the press, they run to a hospital. A Muggle one. Because by the 2010s, The real war isn't wands versus guns anymore. It's modern medicine versus magic. Let's start with the most cursed comparison chart ever. On the Muggle side, you've got gene therapy, mRNA vaccines rolled out to billions, organ transplants, ventilators, ECMO, robotic surgery. On the wizarding side, Madame Pomfrey regrowing bones overnight, anti-venoms brewed in a teapot, spell-based surgeries that knit arteries like you're darning socks. One world takes years of trials and ethics boards. The other waves a stick and says, Episci. Yeah. Take a moment. If you're wondering why this didn't collide sooner, it's because for centuries wizards just shrugged and said, Muggles die, that's what they do. But after a global pandemic where Muggles sequence a virus in days and design vaccines in months, the ICW suddenly has to ask a terrifying question. Could Muggle virology crack dragonpox faster than a bunch of overworked St. Mungo's healers flipping through dusty spellbooks? Dragonpox is basically magical smallpox with glitter. It scars, it kills kids, it terrifies elderly purebloods. Imagine a secret WHO task force trying to model it, while a healer accidentally leaks anonymized case data and pretends they're just very committed fanfic about infectious disease. The more Muggle scientists map immune responses, the more they start seeing anomalies, antibodies that shouldn't exist, recovery curves that look like someone literally interfered with reality. And it's not a one-way street. Lycanthropy crashes straight into Muggle neurology and autoimmune research. You've got a condition that flips a person's entire biology on a lunar schedule, rewrites pain thresholds, messes with memory, and leaves lasting inflammation even when they're human. Muggle researchers would kill for that data. Magical researchers are quietly wondering if understanding the werewolf curse could unlock treatments for epilepsy, multiple sclerosis, maybe even certain mood disorders, which, if you've been paying attention, is the exact kind of thing Hermione loses sleep over as minister. This is why the ICW is actually terrified. Share magical cures, and you risk blowing the Statute of Secrecy wide open. Refuse to share, and you're knowingly watching millions die of diseases you could treat with a potion and a nap. That's not just morally awkward. That's, are we the baddies? Levels of uncomfortable. So the cracks widen. Rogue healers, burnt out from watching Muggle news, end up collaborating with sympathetic doctors and researchers who already suspect something is off. You get a hidden hybrid medical underground. A cardiologist who thinks the experimental drug is just suspiciously fast-acting. A healer who pretends she's using prototype imaging tech while actually casting diagnostic charms between CT scans. Pattern interrupt for you. Picture a windowless basement clinic under a perfectly normal London hospital. Fluorescent lights, beeping monitors, peeling paint. In one corner, a Muggle doctor is shouting for a ventilator for a gasping patient. In the other, a witch and healer green is arguing that a Bezoar and an anti-curse draft will stabilize them faster. They're both right. They're both wrong. And they're both breaking at least 6 international laws just by being in the same room. For now, let's celebrate the fact that some people choose patience over politics. But this medical Cold War can't stay underground forever. Especially once Muggle militaries realize that miracle recoveries keep clustering around the same suspicious hospitals. Event Voucher 15. Cyber warfare and hacking. When a script kiddie finds the ministry. If Muggle militaries quietly noticing miracle recoveries is bad, wait until their IT departments do. Because while wizards love to pretend electricity is cursed, the ministry still has to talk to Muggle governments that run on servers, databases, and way too many acronyms. Let's start with the uncomfortable truth. The British Prime Minister doesn't get a memo by OWL anymore. He has a secure email account, a classified intranet, and an intelligence database that logs every anomalous incident, from UFO sightings to, giant snakes in plumbing. Somewhere in that mess, the ministry has a front. The very boring-sounding Department of Anomalous Affairs. Totally fake. Totally run by wizards. Totally sitting on Muggle hardware. Which, if you've been paying attention, is where everything goes sideways. Picture this. A bored hacker group, half edgelords, half actual geniuses, breaches a Muggle intelligence server, They're looking for proof of aliens, secret weapons, maybe a lizard monarchy. What they find instead are heavily redacted case files. Whole pages blacked out, but a few phrases slip through. Wand-like device, levitation of civilian vehicle, unexplained avian swarm over London. And stamped at the top, over and over, is that name, Department of Anomalous Affairs. If you're wondering, yes, someone screenshots everything. Reddit threads pop up. Conspiracy forums go feral. One particularly obsessive hacker starts correlating anomalous incidents with historical reports. 1996 sky battle over London, 1997 Scottish castle disturbance, all buried under the same department label. Our script kiddie accidentally speedruns what the Death Eaters never managed, connecting the dots. Inside the ministry, alarms go off that don't involve screaming portraits. Magical Muggle liaison gets yanked out of bed. The Obliviator's office pulls a triple shift. Suddenly, you have teams in sensible robes breaking into data centers at 3 in the morning to confront security guards and quietly fry hard drives with overpowered incendio charms. Key Muggle IT staff get emergency security debriefs that are actually very polite brain wipes. Backups are hunted down like Horcruxes. And that one hacker, who keeps slipping past every firewall? Let's just say they experience a very specific string of bad luck. Spilled coffee on their rig, a freak power surge, a minor but extremely convincing bike accident. Nothing provable. Everything targeted. Look, nobody was surprised when suddenly half-blood 20-somethings became the most important people in the building. The Wizardkind can duel, but ask them what a DDoS attack is and they'll assume it's a new dark curse. So you get this new class of tech-literate officials. Kids who grew up with PlayStations and potions, trying to explain to a 300-year-old lawmaker why putting ministry cover names in a Muggle drop-down menu is a terrible idea. And while they're patching this mess, something worse is already coming. Because those same hackers, they're starting to scrape satellite data, live-streamed rocket launches, and weird glitches in the night sky. If Muggle cameras can accidentally catch a dragon at 30,000 feet, what happens when private space companies start filming the whole atmosphere in 4K and notice the one bit of Scotland their sensors can't map at all? So yeah, that one bit of Scotland that refuses to show up on any scan? That was cute when the biggest threat was a blurry Google Earth image. It stops being cute when Elon Musk is live streaming the sky in 4K every other Tuesday, and the comments are like, why is this rectangle of atmosphere redacting itself? Let's start with the visual. Rockets, constant rockets, flaming pencils yeeting themselves into the sky from Florida, Texas, New Zealand, and half a dozen surprise launch sites you didn't even know existed. Starlink-style satellite swarms turning the night into a cosmic traffic jam. And below it all, thousands of amateur astronomers with backyard telescopes, phone adapters, and Reddit threads cataloging every single moving light. If you're wondering how many anonymous wizards are left casually zooming across the moon on broomsticks, yeah, take a moment, because wizards absolutely use that sky. Broom travel, late-night aura patrols, and smug Quidditch pros doing just one more lap around Europe. Thestral-drawn carriages hauling important officials between embassies. Dragons migrating between hidden reserves. Cutting across continents at altitudes Muggles barely touched. Even enchanted weather systems. Localized storms over wizarding settlements to hide traffic. Controlled wind corridors for portkey safety. For centuries, distance plus Muggle disinterest was the whole security plan. Look, nobody was surprised it worked. Muggles weren't staring up. They were staring at dial-up. Then the cameras turned upward, and the instruments followed. Suddenly you've got ultra-sensitive sensors tracking heat plumes, weird energy spikes, and objects that don't match any known aircraft profile. A dragon's magical fire trail? That shows up as a gorgeous, completely unexplainable atmospheric anomaly on some grad student's thesis data. A thestral carriage banking hard to avoid a satellite? Congratulations, you just invented the world's crispest UFO footage. And those enchanted storm systems? They leave repeating cloud patterns that meteorologists can't model. Which, if you've been paying attention, is the exact kind of mystery Muggles make entire Netflix series about. The ICW basically has a group panic attack, emergency meetings, overnight memos, 6 different departments of mysteries pretending they totally saw this coming. They roll out international bans on high-altitude magical travel in specific launch and satellite corridors. Broom traffic gets squeezed lower under commercial flight paths, which every Quidditch player absolutely hates. Dragons are hit with new enchantments that nudge their migration routes away from major orbital paths. They're furious. The handlers are exhausted. The insurance paperwork is heroic. And then it gets darker. Quiet sabotage of a few too curious telescopes. A guiding charm here, a random calibration error there, one observatory that keeps losing its best footage to unexplained hard drive corruption. For now, let's celebrate the fact that nobody's memory charming half of YouTube. Yet, pattern interrupt time. Cut to a Muggle star party in a field. Teenagers with hot chocolate, adults with tripods, everyone staring up, waiting for a meteor shower. A streak crosses the sky. They cheer. Someone zooms in, expecting burning rock. It's a very offended hippogriff, banking violently to avoid a satellite, giving the camera a look that says, "Your entire species is a mistake." And if that's happening over Surrey, imagine what's going wrong over actual war zones, where every inch of airspace is already under a microscope. We'll get to that later. Event Atpur 17. ISIS, Syria, and the collapse of ancient magical sites. If you thought satellites catching hippogriffs was bad, wait until you mix smartphones, war zones, in 1,000-year-old curses. Because while Muggles were watching breaking news banners, magical archaeologists were watching their worst nightmares go live. Let's start with the part you actually remember from real life. Extremist groups like ISIS rolled through Iraq and Syria, blowing up Palmyra, smashing statues in Mosul, torching museums and bulldozing temples that had survived literally everything except modern stupidity. To Muggles, it was cultural annihilation. To the wizarding world, it was that plus the magical equivalent of dropping a niffler into Gringotts and yelling, "Good luck." Those ruins weren't just ruins. A lot of them sat right on top of ancient strongholds from the old Mesopotamian sorcerer dynasties, which, if you've been paying attention, were the people who thought, "Let's bind storms into jars and bury them under cities," was a fun weekend. Under Palmyra alone, there were at least 3 sealed vault complexes on the International Confederation's "Do Not Touch, Do Not Open, Do Not Even Think About It" list. Then the bombs started. Structures collapsed, ward stones cracked, and containment sigils that had held for 2,000 years finally ended up doing what every Hogwarts staircase eventually does. They failed at the worst possible moment. In magical archaeology circles, the panic was instant. Wards tied to physical walls were unraveling as those walls got blown apart. Cursed idols were suddenly lying in open rubble fields, one Oxio away from a Muggle looter. Dormant entities, bound sandwraiths, sleep-locked djinn, guardian constructs that hadn't moved since before the Roman Empire, were getting shaken awake by shockwaves and fire. So the wizarding world moved. Quietly. International teams from at least 7 ministries showed up in the region, posing as archaeologists, NGO staff, or weirdly well-funded UN cultural consultants who never seemed to sleep. If you're wondering why some artifacts mysteriously disappeared before they could hit Muggle black markets, yeah. Take a moment. They used Notice Me Not fields around dig sites, disillusionment on entire convoys, and surgical low-flash magic to extract vault stones and cursed reliquaries before either extremists or very confused Muggle collectors could get their hands blown off. One French curse breaker described it as Gringotts, but with actual guns. Comforting, but here's the ugly bit. While wizards were racing to save their own magical heritage, they weren't stopping the missiles. They weren't shielding whole cities. They could have thrown up massive protective domes, diverted airstrikes, maybe even frozen an entire battlefield for an hour. They didn't. Partly because of the Statute of Secrecy, partly because nobody wanted to turn a regional war into global panic about sorcery. So you get these missions where a team will apparate into a collapsing temple, salvage a screaming obsidian tablet, and then walk past Muggle families who don't get a shield charm. For now, let's celebrate the fact that they prevented about 12 apocalypse-grade artifacts from going walkabout. But that moral hangover? It does not go away. And even with all that effort, they missed one. A sealed chamber under a half-obliterated temple near the Syrian desert line. Officially, it stayed locked. Unofficially, something inside woke up, realized the roof was gone, and left. We'll get to that later. Whatever woke up in that desert, it didn't stay the weirdest thing happening in that region for long, because while curse breakers were quietly panicking over one missing horror in the sand, Muggle cities from Tunis to Cairo to Damascus were filling with something the wizarding world is absolutely terrible at handling: crowds. Let's start with the basics. 2010 to 2012. The Arab Spring. You've got hundreds of thousands of Muggles in city squares, chanting, camping, waving signs, climbing statues, governments on edge, police lines, tear gas, and over all of it, a forest of smartphones, filming literally everything from 20 different angles and live streaming it to the planet, which, if you've been paying attention, is the Statute of Secrecy's worst nightmare. In the Middle Ages, if a wizard accidentally levitated a cart in front of an angry mob, you obliviated 3 peasants and called it a day. In 2011 Cairo, you accidentally levitate a police van and it's on YouTube, Facebook, and some conspiracy subreddit before an obliviator can even find the square. But here's the problem. Crowds are also perfect cover. An Auror in Muggle clothes can move through a protest almost invisible, because nobody's staring at one person when there are 10,000. A disillusioned healer can kneel by an injured protester, mutter a quick episki in the shadow of a burning car, and everyone just thinks the bleeding stopped by itself. So you get this bizarre double reality. Protests give wizards the best hiding place they've ever had, and the highest risk that any magical slip-up is going to be filmed in HD, slowed down, zoomed in, and dissected by a million bored Muggles who really want aliens to be real. If you're wondering how the ministries took this, look, nobody was surprised that Kingsley was stressed out of his mind. The British ministry, the Egyptian ministry, the Turkish ministry, all of them are sending frantic owls to the International Confederation of Wizards, like, "Hi, what's the protocol for when every Muggle has a tiny pensieve in their pocket?" And the ICW has another fear. Unstable Muggle regimes love a scapegoat. A dictator watching his people rise up might decide it's not bad policies, it's sorcery. You only need one captured hedge witch, one unlucky squib, for a show trial to turn into an actual witch hunt. Or worse, a general decides, if magic is real, I want it on my side. And suddenly you're looking at secret prisons trying to weaponize anyone with a wand. So wizard involvement stays very, very quiet. Healers set up in back alleys, casting numbing charms on broken ribs and vanishing glass from wounds. Structural mages reinforce cracked apartment blocks, so they don't pancake under the weight of people on the roof. A few specialists slip calming charms into the edge of a panicked crowd, so a stampede never quite starts. If it goes right, nobody ever knows they were there. And for a lot of young witches and wizards, this is uncomfortably familiar. They grew up on stories of the Battle of Hogwarts, of students resisting a corrupt regime with graffiti, meetings, and secret networks. Then they look at Muggle kids facing riot shields with cardboard signs and phone cameras and feel that déjà vu hit hard. The war was over, the pattern wasn't, and the next Muggle crisis would hit even closer to the wizarding idea of plague and cursed air. Event the first year of 19, Ukraine, hybrid war, and magical espionage 2.0. If the pandemic was the wizarding idea of a cursed fog, Ukraine was something even worse. A war where every blast, every trench, every shaky conversation in a basement ended up online in real time. Drones in the sky, bots on the internet, soldiers on the ground, and a million phone cameras watching everything. Let's start with what Muggles call hybrid war. Cyber attacks blacking out power grids. Disinformation campaigns flooding social media with fake videos. Swarms of cheap quadcopters hunting tanks. Old school artillery and tanks still rolling, while Telegram channels and TikTok lives narrate the whole thing like it's a never-ending reality show. If you're wondering what that does to the Statute of Secrecy, yeah. Take a moment. Because for centuries, espionage was where wizards quietly excelled. Invisibility cloaks, disillusionment charms, polyjuice to walk straight through enemy HQ as their own general, legilimency to pull battle plans right out of someone's head. Kingsley's generation grew up thinking, if Muggles go to war, we can always sneak around the edges and nudge outcomes without being seen. Then the drones showed up. Suddenly, it's not just Muggle eyes you have to dodge. It's thermal cameras, motion sensors, automated gun turrets, satellites, and some teenager live streaming from a rooftop. An invisible wizard crossing a street at night? Great. Until a quadcopter with infrared sees a mysterious human-shaped heat blob walking with no visible body, which, if you've been paying attention, is basically a giant neon sign that says, "Hi, I'm magic." The International Confederation of Wizards absolutely panicked. Two nightmare scenarios kept coming up in emergency meetings. 1. Magical involvement accidentally tips the balance of a Muggle war, and suddenly, you don't just have one Voldemort, you have a dozen governments begging for their own pet sorcerer. 2. Somebody finally catches a spell. A Patronus or a broom squad on high-res video, it goes viral, and you can't obliviate the entire internet. So, the response was brutal and creative. Enchanted decoy drones became a thing. Empty shells charmed to mimic engine noise, heat signatures, even fake radio chatter, pulling Muggle fire away from real civilians. Illusionists were quietly loaned out to Eastern European ministries to clean satellite passes, layering glamours over scorched fields, mass graves, or moving magical units so the photos showed nothing but boring farmland. Aurors had to level up. Traditional cloak and wand training wasn't enough. They learned to move like ghosts through both physical and digital battlefields, apparating between blind spots and sensor coverage, using Muggle VPNs and burner phones while under Fidelius, and coordinating with unspeakables who specialized in anti-algorithmic interference spells that scrambled pattern recognition software. Look, nobody was surprised when a few old purebloods grumbled that this felt uncomfortably close to working for Muggle generals. We'll get to that later. For now, let's celebrate the tiny win that nobody accidentally took out a satellite on live TV. But if you think war zones are the worst place for secrecy, you're not thinking like a machine. Hybrid war was loud, messy, human. The next problem would be quiet, patient, and terrifyingly good at noticing patterns humans miss. Like a castle that's always cloudy on satellite photos. Or forests that never quite match climate models. What happens when the thing watching the wizarding world isn't a soldier or a politician, but an AI that never sleeps? Event numbers 20, AI, pattern recognition, and the Hogwarts glitch. So now the watcher isn't a guy in a tower with binoculars. It's a billion tiny eyes, all feeding one giant, overcaffeinated brain in the cloud. Modern AI is trained to stare at satellite images, CCTV, drone footage, and your cousin's blurry holiday photos, and ask one question: what looks weird? Unusual weather, unexplained movement, statistical outliers, stuff humans shrug off. The algorithm obsessively highlights in neon. Let's start with the satellites. Companies are literally scanning the planet daily. Climate models, crop monitoring, traffic patterns, you name it. An AI tuned to detect tampered images and sensor glitches starts chewing through years of data. And then it finds something. The same coordinates in Scotland. Every single time. Photos blur, cloud cover snaps into place like a Photoshop brush. Light scatters wrong. It's not dramatic, just consistently wrong. If you're wondering, that is the kind of thing machines are terrifyingly good at noticing. One bad photo, whatever. A decade of slightly off images in the exact same square kilometer. The model screams at its human handlers, "This is not normal." Especially when the same thing shows up on weather radar, thermal scans, even random tourist selfies from nearby hills that always, somehow, lose resolution in the background. Cut to the Muggle side. A bored but brilliant data scientist at a tech company writes an internal report: anomalous data cluster, Scottish Highlands. Another at a government contractor flags a persistent sensor corruption zone that doesn't match any known hardware failure pattern. No solar interference, no known military base, no standard error profile. Together, these little red flags start piling up on desks from London to Washington. Look, Nobody was surprised when some conspiracy subreddit decided it was aliens, but when the same coordinates keep showing up in intelligence briefings, climate studies, and a grad student's thesis on satellite error distribution, yeah, take a moment. People with budgets get curious. Quiet task forces form. Someone suggests a field visit. The wizarding world panics in a very nerdy way. This isn't obliviating one unlucky hiker. This is beating math. The ministry ends up recruiting every arithmancer, cursebreaker, and I actually liked ancient runes kid they can find. The job? Design charms that mimic natural noise. Spells that randomly drop pixels like a dying camera sensor. Bend light in ways that match real atmospheric distortion. And generate fake error logs, so the anomalies look like boring hardware problems. Pattern interrupt. Boardroom, fluorescent lighting, aggressively beige carpet. A data scientist is at the front, passionately explaining a spooky, castle-shaped blind spot that appears in every dataset. Thermal, optical, radio, nothing gets clean readings. While he's talking about non-Gaussian noise signatures, a woman in a sensible blazer sits in the corner saying nothing. She's a witch, glamored as an IT consultant. She casually tweaks a ring, and the projector flickers, the graph corrupts, and the anomaly suddenly aligns with a known firmware bug. Guess it's just the cameras, someone sighs. Meeting adjourned. Crisis delayed, for now, because AI isn't stopping, and the next system won't just look at Scotland. It'll start asking why certain forests, lakes, and abandoned castles all over the world keep refusing to behave like the rest of the map, which, if you've been paying attention, is a problem once you add dragons to the equation. We'll get to that later. Event Number 21. Mass extinctions when magical creatures lose their last. Hiding places. If satellites and AI are bad, the climate crisis is the boss level. Because magic can hide a forest from Google Earth, but it can't do much when the forest just isn't there anymore. Yeah? Take a moment. Let's start with the big picture. The ministry really doesn't want to put on a memo. Muggles clear millions of hectares of forest, drain wetlands, overfish oceans, and pump so much pollution into rivers that even the giant squid would file a complaint. Every time a normal species disappears, a magical one usually goes with it, dragged down because its food, nesting sites, or breeding grounds just got turned into a parking lot and a Starbucks. Unicorns are the poster children for this disaster. Entire herds that used to roam ancient European forests suddenly find their woods logged, fragmented, and lit up by hiking trails and GoPros. The old protections still work on maps and satellites, which, if you've been paying attention, is great until the trees themselves are gone. You can't hide a clearing that stretches for miles, so unicorns end up pressed into smaller, denser pockets of forest where one stray camper with a phone can blow the Statute of Secrecy in 4K. Water isn't safer. Kelpies that spent centuries in misty, quiet locks now swim through fertilizer runoff, oil slicks, and whatever cursed potion equivalent Muggles call industrial waste. Some start getting sick, others get mean. A few abandon their traditional waters and move closer to coastal shipping lanes, which is how you get very confused Muggle sailors reporting aggressive seaweed horses, trying to drown them off the coast of Scotland. And then you've got the nightmare fuel. Acromantulas. Their jungle and deep forest habitats keep shrinking. Fires rip through unplottable reserves, and suddenly colonies are migrating. Not across magical borders. Across suburbs. You get entire neighborhoods in Brazil or Indonesia where the local council is like, we have a spider problem, and the local wizarding office is like, nope, you have an acromantula problem. So what do wizards do? They cheat. Quietly. International coalitions start secretly funding Muggle conservation NGOs, nudging governments into creating national parks in exactly the places magical ecosystems need. A suspicious number of biodiversity hotspots end up protected after one persuasive witch shows up at a UN conference, and everyone just really agrees with her. In other regions, subtle charms make land feel cursed, boring, or economically useless to developers. Whole valleys get reputations as money pits, while magizoologists are in the background high-fiving. But it's not enough. desperation sets in. Some creatures are moved into magically expanded sanctuaries, forests with more space inside than on the outside, cliffside caverns that unfold into whole mountain ranges. Others end up in stasis fields, frozen in time until someone figures out how to fix their habitats. Breeding programs spring up that are loving, careful, and still feel uncomfortably like magical zoos. If you're wondering whose heart is breaking the loudest, it's Hagrid's. His worst nightmare isn't a ministry raid on his pumpkin patch. It's waking up one day and realizing there might be nowhere left on Earth where a dragon, a giant, or an eight-eyed spider can live unseen. And if the land runs out, what do you do next? You start looking up. We'll get to that later. So, yeah. Wizards start looking up and realize the Muggles got there first. Let's start with the modern hobbyist apocalypse. You've got 10-year-olds with birthday drones, bored office workers flying quadcopters over forests, lakes, and crumbling castles, and every single flight ends up on YouTube or TikTok with a thumbnail like, "Abandoned Mansion, what I found will shock you." The wizarding world used to worry about one stray hiker. Now it's worried about 1 million airborne paparazzi with 4K cameras and nothing better to do. If you're wondering when this became a real problem, it's around the time internet access exploded and every Muggle suddenly decided they were a filmmaker. Remote Scottish valleys, Eastern European mountains, windswept Welsh cliffs, classic dragon territory, are exactly the places drone nerds love. Quiet, scenic, and apparently full of mysterious shapes that the comments section swears are cryptids, which, if you've been paying attention, is usually code for some poor magical creature trying to eat its dinner in peace. The close calls start piling up fast. One drone zips straight through a junior Quidditch practice over a supposedly deserted moor, nearly decapitates a chaser, and records 3 seconds of broomsticks and goalposts before a 7th-year seeker smashes it out of the air and pretends it was a weird fat bird. Another catches centaurs at the tree line of the Forbidden Forest, silhouettes on a ridge that end up in a viral compilation titled Real Mythical Creatures. A different pilot chases what he thinks is a massive eagle over a glacial lake. Spoiler, it's a baby Norwegian ridgeback on its first solo flight. The Ministry and the ICW go into crisis mode. Anti-drone wards get layered over every major reserve, school, and sanctuary. Not just Muggle-repelling charms, but spells that scramble GPS, drain batteries, and quietly push anything with propellers off course. International committees show up in Muggle airspace regulations as environmental advisory groups, politely insisting on no-fly zones around certain mountains and islands. And behind the scenes, Aurors learn a whole new set of hijacking charms designed to grab a drone mid-air, wipe the SD card, and let it mysteriously malfunction into the nearest lake. For now, let's celebrate how well that works, until it doesn't. Because the PR problem is brutal. Every time a drone clips a thestral wing or catches a tail disappearing into the clouds, it ends up in a top 10 unexplained drone videos montage. Wizards have to seed fake CGI breakdowns, hire Muggle graphic artists through shell companies, and leak confessions from bored teens claiming they faked the whole thing on their laptop. Yeah, take a moment. The Statute of Secrecy is now being protected by guys who make Marvel fan edits. And even with all that, there's one dragon incident coming where the "it's just CGI bro" defense almost isn't enough. And the internet comes terrifyingly close to being right. Event Notchukr 23, Viral Dragon Sighting, the hoax that wasn't. Let's start with the night the Statute of Secrecy lost an argument to TikTok. Rural Romania. Early autumn. One of the Horntail Reserve's nastier residents gets caught in a freak storm, blown straight off its mountain range flight path. The rain's coming sideways, visibility is garbage, and this dragon is flying low, angry, and very, very visible. It rips over a tiny village at dusk, just as the streetlights flicker on and everyone is outside walking dogs, smoking, or scrolling on their phones. You know what that means. Cameras. Everywhere. At least 6 different people film it from different angles. A kid on TikTok, a retired guy on his balcony, a girl testing her new DSLR, 2 tourists live streaming, and some local who only wanted B-roll of the storm for his YouTube channel. Instead, He gets a full Hungarian horntail silhouette. Wings spread, tail spiked, roaring against lightning like it's auditioning for Game of Thrones. The clips go online within minutes. TikTok, Twitter, YouTube. One of them hits 1 million views before the dragon even lands back at the reserve. People slow it down, zoom in, stabilize the footage. They're drawing wing membranes, counting spikes, arguing about heat distortion. Local news picks it up that night. By morning, it's on international TV under the caption, "Real Dragon Viral Mystery Explained." Spoiler, nobody explains anything, because the internet does what the internet does. Debunkers show up calling it CGI. Others say it's a drone. Someone claims it's an animatronic from an upcoming theme park. One guy insists it's clearly a kite, which, if you've been paying attention, is an amazing sentence to say about a literal dragon. Meanwhile, the ICW goes into full crisis mode. Emergency meeting, midnight. You've got Romanian dragon handlers who look like they haven't slept since Goblet of Fire, British obliviators with permanent migraines from TikTok cleanup duty, and a new breed of PR-minded wizards who speak fluent algorithm. They're arguing over two options: lean into the "it's just viral marketing for a movie" narrative, or stage a fake confession from a Muggle VFX studio claiming they made the whole thing on a laptop. If you're wondering, they choose chaos and do both. They imperious. Kidding, relax. They bribe a small effects house through about 12 shell companies, feed them a fake dragon model, and help them post super convincing behind-the-scenes footage. Green screens, tracking markers, the whole nerd buffet. At the same time, they nudge entertainment blogs to run headlines like "Viral Dragon Clip, Actually Genius Promo, Fandom Fooled." Partial win, partial disaster. Most people move on. The fake breakdowns get shared, reaction channels dunk on believers, and the algorithm decides dragons are out and dancing cats are back in. For now, let's celebrate. Except, a stubborn core of dragon truthers grabbed the original unedited files before anything got taken down. They've got offline copies, metadata, weather data, satellite tracks. They're comparing wing beats to known birds and going, "Yeah, that's not a kite, my dude." And this is the new normal. The wizarding world doesn't survive because nobody sees them anymore. It survives because in a world of deepfakes, AI, and viral hoaxes, nobody can agree on what they saw. Which is great, until the next event where disagreement isn't enough, and Muggle governments start quietly asking the right questions. Event number 24. The Great Hogwarts. Near leak a drone, a vlogger, and a storm. So Muggle governments start quietly asking the right questions. And then one guy with a backpack and a drone almost finds the answer. Let's start with our accidental final boss, a mid-tier but growing travel vlogger. Scottish Highlands series, sponsored hiking boots, drone shots for the thumbnail. He's chasing that untouched wilderness vibe, which, if you've been paying attention, is Wizarding World for, "We hid something here, please go away." He launches this high-end 4K drone, GPS locked, range extended, the whole tech bro starter pack. Conditions: clear sky, stable winds, perfect flying day. And then, right as the drone crosses into the Hogwarts protective radius, the weather just it flips. Localized storm. Like someone hit rage quit on the atmosphere. Dark clouds spool out of nowhere. Lightning that looks suspiciously hand-drawn. Wind that slams the drone sideways. If you're wondering, yes, he keeps filming. Because of course he does. The footage is chaos, but in between the violent camera shakes, you get these tiny, infuriating glimpses. A stone turret stabbing through the cloud layer. A flash of warm, moving light in a narrow window that absolutely is not a lighthouse. A massive lake below, surface rippling in a long, rolling pattern, like something the size of a train just turned over underneath. He gets maybe 40 seconds before the drone hard resets, loses signal, and death dives into what he thinks is just some old forest. Spoiler, it's the Forbidden One. He hikes back down the mountain furious, soaking wet, and absolutely convinced he's discovered a hidden castle. The video title basically writes itself. Lost Scottish Fortress? My drone caught this before it crashed. Behind the scenes, the wizard response is pure panic speed run. Hogwarts' weather charms get cranked to 11, trying to smother the storm they accidentally created without making it look even weirder on satellite. Anti-recording wards slam into modern optics and lose, because the spells were written for camcorders and grainy CCTV, not stabilized 4K with auto contrast and AI sharpening. Then it escalates. The ministry's Muggle liaison office leans on its friends in tech. Suddenly, the video's recommendation rate drops. AI-based filters quietly flag it as low-quality, likely hoax content. Search results bury it under urban exploration. Fails and obviously fake CGI castles. No statement, no takedown, just digital quicksand. But it doesn't disappear. It ends up exactly where everything weird on the internet lives. Conspiracy forums, Reddit threads, Discord servers named things like the real Hogwarts. People enhance frames, compare the turrets to medieval blueprints, map the lake to known locks and go, yeah, that's not on any tourist route. And a few very boring, very serious Muggle researchers start whispering too. Because the localized storm, it doesn't match historical weather patterns. That whole region has had off-data spikes for years. Instruments glitch, wind models fail. Satellite images show tiny anomalies, always in the same rough area, always written off as processing errors. Look, nobody was surprised in the Department of Mysteries. This is what happens when 60% of the planet has a camera and the rest has a telescope. The Statute of Secrecy isn't being broken by Dark Lords anymore. It's being chipped away by hobbyists and algorithms. So, here's the real question. How many near misses like this can the wizarding world survive before one video is too big, too fast, and too public to bury? Because the next event on this list, that's when quietly asking questions turns into governments drawing up plans. And this is where Kingsley's life turns into a permanent migraine. Because if governments are drawing up plans, somebody has to answer the phone when the Prime Minister calls at 3 a.m. going, so, hypothetically, Driggins? That somebody is Kingsley Shacklebolt, now Minister for Magic, trying to rebuild after Voldemort while the Muggle world speedruns the entire tech tree. Let's start with this. Kingsley actually understands it. He's done undercover work with the Muggle Prime Minister. He knows what a television is. And he has that calm, I have seen some things energy that makes permanent crisis sound like a staff meeting. But even he is not prepared for smartphones, satellites, and 24-hour news deciding to tag team the Statute of Secrecy. So he reforms. Hard. The first big move is the Muggle Technology Liaison Office. Picture a room full of half-bloods and very stressed Ravenclaws watching live feeds and scrolling social media, trying to spot accidental magic before it goes viral. Their whole job is basically, is that a dragon? Or did Marvel release a new trailer? They track satellite launches, monitor Google Earth anomalies, and yes, they know what TikTok is. They hate that they know what TikTok is. Next, he takes the tiny, underfunded misuse of Muggle Artifacts office and blows it up into a full department of Muggle studies and integration, not just confiscating cursed teapots anymore. We're talking Muggle law experts, cultural analysts, witches who can quote both the Statute of Secrecy and the UN Charter from memory. After 9/11, when anti-terror surveillance explodes and intelligence agencies start sharing everything, this department is the one rewriting visitor protocols, portkey routes, and even how obliviators file paperwork. And because it's not just Britain losing its mind, Kingsley pushes for new international secrecy treaties. If you're wondering how you keep dragons off high-res satellite images, the answer is you don't alone. You get every ministry and the ICW in a room and argue for 12 hours about ward calibration, while someone from the Romanian Dragon Sanctuary silently cries into their coffee. Inside the ministry, it's war. Old guard purebloods are like, we've stayed hidden for centuries, why panic now? And the younger lot are literally holding up smartphones going, yeah, take a moment. One side thinks unplottable means problem solved. The other side has watched a Muggle find a secret military base on Google Maps and post it to Reddit for fun. Every major Muggle event you've seen in this video, it triggers another round of bureaucratic chaos. Post 9/11, new bylaws on magical travel near airports and government buildings, smartphone boom, digital contact protocols, stricter rules on underage magic in cities, Entire task forces dedicated to scrubbing footage and faking CGI hoax explanations. Climate disasters and mass extinctions? Suddenly, the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures is drafting ecological policies with Muggle scientists. Because flooded merpeople colonies and migrating dragons are very hard to obliviate out of the evening news. So the ministry doesn't become this sleek, hyper-competent machine. It becomes a constantly panicking, patching, improvising mess that somehow, if you've been paying attention, keeps the statute mostly intact by pure stubbornness and caffeine. It's less grand conspiracy and more group project that never ends. And just when Kingsley thinks he has a system, the next crisis hits, and this time, Muggles aren't just asking questions. They start demanding answers. So what does that actually look like on the ground? It looks like this. The epilogue gives you soft-focus domesticity, while the Muggle news ticker is screaming in all caps. Harry is walking James and Albus to platform 9 3/4, doing the whole, "It's not so bad, Dad" speech. While outside that station, the Muggle world is dealing with 9/11, Iraq, Afghanistan, terror alerts, rolling news banners, and a global internet that refuses to shut up. The wizarding world thinks the war is over. The Muggle world is like, "Cute anyway, here's 20 more. Let's start with that contrast. Inside the barrier, owls, trunks, hand-me-down jumpers. Outside the barrier, CCTV cameras, smartphones, and 1,000 people live streaming their commute." Harry's generation grew up dodging Death Eaters. Their kids grow up dodging being accidentally tagged in a viral TikTok where a house elf blinks in the background. And if you're wondering who is keeping everyone from completely losing it, Muggle-borns, constantly. Hermione, Dean, Justin Finch-Fletchley, all of them end up as the unofficial translators of Muggle panic. A Muggle war kicks off, and every pureblood in the Auror office just turns to Hermione like she's the BBC, the UN, and Google combined. She's the one saying, "No, that's not dark magic, that's a drone," while already drafting a memo about anti-satellite countercharms. Dean Thomas becomes the guy in the Auror break room explaining what a hashtag is and why "Twaka dragon spotted" is a problem. Kingsley sits in his office with a stack of daily prophets and a stack of Muggle papers. And it's the Muggle-borns who point out which headlines are actually about them. Which, if you've been paying attention, is basically the whole post-war vibe. Permanent damage control. Emotionally, it's brutal. Veterans of the Battle of Hogwarts start seeing Muggle footage of bombed cities, tanks in streets, propaganda channels spinning obvious lies, and it hits way too close. People who watch the Carrows torture kids now watch Muggle strongmen on TV and feel that same cold, familiar dread. Triggers everywhere. A speech that sounds a bit too much like, "for the greater good." A crowd chanting a little too hard. Yeah. Take a moment. At home, it's smaller, messier, weirder. Harry sits at the kitchen table while Albus tries to explain smartphones, and Harry is just lost. This man mastered the Elder Wand and cannot work out why the photo won't stop recording. Ron, of course, calls it a Muggle omniocular, and then spends 20 minutes making jokes about you-know-who versus YouTube, and how at least Voldemort didn't have a comment section. Hermione, she's minister, she's a mum, and she's up at 2 a.m. with 3 candles lit, reading Muggle climate reports and dragon migration charts side by side, rising sea levels, melting ice, merpeople habitats, Kelpies losing territory. She's scribbling policy notes about whether they have a moral duty to help with Muggle vaccines when a pandemic hits, or if that breaks everything they've been protecting for centuries. Pattern interrupt, Sunday dinner at the Burrow. Half the table is arguing about Chudley Cannon's scores. George is loudly insisting this is their year, again. The other half? Hermione, Percy, and Bill are in a full debate about whether the wizarding world should secretly boost Muggle vaccine production, while Arthur asks what a cold chain is and Molly just wants someone to pass the potatoes. And sitting between those halves are the kids, growing up bilingual in magic and memes, knowing that the next crisis won't care which side of the barrier they stand on. We'll get to what happens when one of those kids finally puts both worlds on a collision course. And those kids, they don't stay theoretical for very long. They grow up, they get assigned houses, and they get grandparents who still think the weirdest thing about their son-in-law is that he supports the Chudley canons. Let's start with the mixed families, because this is where the Statute of Secrecy quietly bleeds out at the kitchen table. You've got Muggle-borns like Hermione marrying old wizarding names, and suddenly Sunday lunch looks like this. One side of the table arguing about BBC pundits, the other side arguing about Quidditch fouls, and a 9-year-old who knows both how to reset the Wi-Fi and how to disarm you in 3 wand movements. Half-blood kids end up with Muggle grandparents who watch breaking news about real wars while their grandkids revise for defense against the dark arts. Yeah, take a moment. If you're wondering who translates all that, welcome to the new era of godparents. Harry and Teddy are the blueprint. Being a godparent used to mean birthday presents and the occasional broomstick. Post-1998, it means navigating 2 information ecosystems that are both terrifying in completely different ways. You're trying to protect a kid from dark wizards and from doom scrolling, from cursed lockets, and from that one Muggle news feed that makes everything sound like the end of the world. So, you get scenes like this. Teddy asking Harry why some Muggle government can't just Expelliarmus the bad guys, because in his head, war is a duel you can win if you're brave and have good friends. Or a Weasley grandkid quietly asking why they can't sneak a potion into a hospital to fix a sick Muggle relative. The adults know the rules. The kids only know that magic is real and somebody they love is hurting. Look, nobody was surprised that this gets messy. You can't raise bilingual kids in magic and memes and expect clean boundaries. Every major Muggle event stops being just a headline and becomes a family problem. A terrorist attack turns into a dinner table argument about whether the ministry should step in. A pandemic becomes a secret conversation in the hallway about whether St. Mungo's is sharing too much or not enough. Someone always ends up feeling guilty because they could help more but they're not allowed, or because they did help and now they're lying about it. Which, if you've been paying attention, is the emotional core of the post-war wizarding world. The law says, stay hidden. Love says, show up. Marriages, godparent promises, cross-world cousins who swap chocolate frogs for smartphones at Christmas. All of that ties wizard lives to Muggle fates so tightly that the old idea of separate worlds starts to sound like something out of a very outdated history of magic essay. And it only takes one of those kids, one day, deciding they're done choosing between them. We'll get to what happens when that choice stops being hypothetical. And when that kid finally stops choosing, the universe has receipts ready. Let's start with Voldemort's big tragic flaw. He thought the real fight was blood purity. Ancient family trees, creepy snake speeches, domination of the lesser Muggles. Meanwhile, the actual force that ends up shredding wizard supremacy is Wi-Fi, satellites, and a billion bored teenagers with cameras. The Dark Lord spent decades mastering soul-splitting murder magic, and he lost to global data plans. If you're wondering how unfair that is, it's kind of perfect. Death Eaters always talked about Muggles like they were this vague, dirty swarm. Dangerous in theory, but only if they got organized. Cut to the 21st century, where they actually did get organized, just not in the way Lucius Malfoy imagined. Not with pitchforks, with weather apps, with Google Earth, with some guy in Ohio live streaming a blurry dragon shape over Romania and yelling, "Chat, did you see that?" The irony is brutal. They always feared Muggle power in this bigoted, abstract way, whispering about their numbers and their weapons, while the real existential threat is a push notification. Hogwarts can hide from Death Eaters, but can it hide from a decade of satellite imagery catching the same suspicious cloud spiral over Scotland every September 1st? You can obliviate one hiker. You cannot obliviate the entire internet archival system. And this is where justice gets weirdly satisfying. Voldemort, the man who refused to learn basic Muggle studies, is now rotting in that fragmented, eternal magical limbo, while the world he tried to rule gets reshaped by things he literally would have called toy lights. Smartphones, thermal cameras, AI models trained on every piece of footage humanity ever uploaded. His whole ideology ended up being less relevant than a Ring camera. Look, nobody was surprised Umbridge didn't live to see TikTok regulation meetings. But imagine her ghost watching this. The pink cardigan, quill torture, I will have order nightmare who tried to control Hogwarts with clipboard checklists would absolutely combust trying to write rules for viral clips of accidental magic. Her ministry-era obsession with parchment and official stamps suddenly looks adorable compared to trying to regulate AI image generators that keep inventing new Hogwarts sightings faster than the Obliviators can say, "confounding incident." Yeah. Take a moment. Which, if you've been paying attention, is the universe's favorite joke here. Every fascist control freak in wizarding history gets outplayed by bored Muggle teens, open-source coders, and some intern running a climate satellite that keeps flagging unidentified thermal anomalies, where dragons are supposed to be extinct. For now, let's celebrate that poetic payback. The Death Eaters lost. Voldemort is stuck in magical timeout. Umbridge faded into obscurity. Couldn't have happened to a nicer group. But the punchline is that the story doesn't end with good guys cheering in the Great Hall. It keeps going into this long, messy, absolutely chaotic negotiation between magic and reality. And in the next part, we're going to look at how close that negotiation is to completely breaking down. So when you zoom out, this long, messy negotiation is basically 4 overlapping disasters wearing a trench coat. Let's start with the loudest one, wars and terror. After 9/11, Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Ukraine, all of it, Muggle governments crank surveillance and counter-terror up to 11. The ICW and the Ministry don't get to sit this out. They're suddenly doing covert diplomacy, memory-charming intelligence officers, and quietly redirecting cursed artifacts before some Black Ops team calls it a WMD. Then you've got tech and surveillance, which, if you've been paying attention, is the real Dark Lord of the 21st century. In 1998, barely anyone was online. Now, over half the planet is walking around with a tiny omniocular that auto-uploads to the internet. One stray Patronus in a city, one house elf photobombing a TikTok, and you've got 3 million views before the Obliviators even find the Wi-Fi password. Satellites scan every inch of Earth. Google Earth redraws the map, and unplottable starts to sound less like an enchantment and more like a dare. Layer in pandemics and climate chaos, and the wizarding world's moral high ground starts looking very slippery. A global virus hits, Muggle ICUs overflow, and St. Mungo's is sitting on potions that clear lungs in 30 seconds. Do you share? Do you fake a clinical trial? Do you let people die so the statute survives? Same with climate. Melting ice caps expose merpeople colonies. Dragon reserves are pushed out of hiding by wildfires, and centaur forests get logged on satellite deforestation trackers. Wizards either cooperate with Muggle climate scientists or watch their hidden habitats end up in a Nat Geo documentary. And just when you think it can't get weirder, space and AI show up like, "Hi, we're here to ruin your wards." Muggle telescopes peer through atmospheric charms. Private rockets fly over supposedly protected areas, and AI starts pattern-matching glitches in footage that looks suspiciously like Thestrals. The Statute of Secrecy doesn't shatter in one dramatic prophecy moment. It gets hairline fractures. Constantly. Patched, cracked again, reinforced, then quietly undermined by the next app update. Put together, all 24 of these Muggle events don't blow the doors off magic in one go. They create a world where secrecy is an ongoing maintenance job, not a one-time spell. The wizarding world stops being this frozen 19th century cosplay society and becomes reactive, adaptive, annoyingly plugged into Muggle reality, whether it wants to be or not. Emotionally, that's the second war your favorites are fighting. Harry, Hermione, Neville, all of them. First war, don't die, stop Voldemort. Second war, don't become irrelevant, don't get exposed, don't let Hogwarts turn into a viral, haunted boarding school thread on Reddit. Hermione's in the Ministry arguing about data retention charms. Harry's Auror office is half dark wizards, half damage control. Neville's trying to teach teenagers herbology, while confiscating phones that keep trying to auto-tag the Forbidden Forest. And yeah. Take a moment. Because if you're wondering what really happens after Deathly Hallows, it's not just who married whom and how many kids they ended up with. It's 1,000 tiny Muggle headlines slowly turning magic from a secret into an open secret. For now, let's celebrate that the world doesn't explode. But in the next part, we're going to ask a much scarier question. What happens when wizards finally admit the statute is already broken? So why does any of this hit you right in the fandom feelings instead of just sounding like a cursed TED Talk about TikTok and time turners? Because when you map real-world headlines onto the wizarding world, it stops being a frozen fairy tale and starts feeling like a messy, parallel history that kept going after the epilogue closed. Let's start with that. The books end in 1998. Our world does not. You know what came after 9/11, Iraq, Afghanistan, climate spirals, pandemics, social media, the whole cursed buffet. If you're wondering where Harry was while you were watching those news reports, this timeline says he was there too. Not in front of the cameras, but in the background with a wand in his hand, trying to figure out what a no-fly zone actually is. That's the weird comfort of it. You get to imagine Harry, Ginny, Ron, Hermione, Luna, all of them quietly aging alongside you. They're reading the same awful headlines, except they're doing it with quills and profit clippings, while their kids ask why Muggles are suddenly obsessed with rectangles that talk back. Your memory of, say, lockdown or climate anxiety gets braided together with the idea that somewhere, an overworked St. Mungo's healer is arguing with a Muggle doctor about ventilators and vanishing sickness, and the tone is always a little bittersweet. Magic doesn't snap its fingers and cancel war or disease or climate grief. Wizards can't just cast finite on carbon emissions. People still die in Muggle conflicts. Oceans still rise around hidden merfolk cities. Dragons still lose habitats to burning forests. But imagining a handful of witches and wizards quietly apparating sandbags into flood zones or slipping untraceable healing potions into overwhelmed hospitals gives you this tiny, stubborn hope that kindness is happening in the gaps nobody films. Which, if you've been paying attention, is exactly what the series always did. Big evil, small resistance, massive systems, tiny choices. Now you just scale that up to the 21st century. Luna doesn't stop being Luna. She just starts campaigning for magical Muggle ecological alliances, earnestly explaining Kelpie migration data at UN climate conferences, while everyone assumes she's from a very intense NGO. Hermione absolutely drafts international health accords and tries to sneak magical quarantine protocols into World Health Organization guidelines. Ron complains nonstop about Wi-Fi, but he's also the dad yelling at the telly during the World Cup because he is secretly aggressively invested in Muggle football. Pattern interrupt for your brain. What if, from a wizard's perspective, we're the terrifying magical creatures? Think about it. Invisible forces that reshape the planet, powered by code and carbon instead of wands. Satellites that see through every disillusionment. Billions of Muggles casting little digital spells with their thumbs all day. Yeah? Take a moment. That flip is the emotional payoff. This isn't just, wouldn't it be cool if Hogwarts had Wi-Fi? It's realizing that the world you grew up in and the world Harry grew up in are quietly crashing into each other, and both sides are a little scared of the other. For now, let's celebrate that this collision makes the wizarding world feel alive again. But next, we're going to see what happens when that fear turns into policy, and the statute stops being a background rule and starts being a battleground. So now that the statute is officially a battleground, it's your turn to start the war in the comments. What's the one real-world headline where you think the wizarding world just throws up its hands and goes, yeah, okay, we're done hiding now? Let's start with the obvious suspects. Was it 9/11 for you? If you're wondering how that day plays out with magic involved, imagine Kingsley in the Auror office, watching the towers fall on a Muggle TV, realizing in real time that Muggles are about to build surveillance states that make the Marauders' map look subtle. Were you old enough to remember where you were that day? Drop that memory and then tell me which character you picture seeing it. Is it Arthur Weasley, horrified and fascinated? Is it Hermione, instantly trying to draft a joint Muggle-Wizard anti-terror policy while everyone else is still in shock? Or maybe your line in the sand is COVID. You're stuck in lockdown, doom-scrolling, and somewhere in Scotland, Madame Pomfrey is staring at the news like, you people invented ventilators, but not basic bubblehead charms? If you lived through that first wave, how do you imagine your favorites reacting? Ron refusing to wear a mask because it smells like dung bombs, while Hermione is triple enchanting hand sanitizer. Luna calmly explaining that Nargles predicted this, and nobody listened. Yeah. Take a moment. I want your hyper-specific headcanons. Where was McGonagall when the first iPhone dropped? What did Harry say the first time he saw a TikTok filter that accidentally caught a ghost in the background? If you've been paying attention, you know this era is where magic and tech stop being parallel lines and start crashing into each other. So pitch me your event number 25. The one that finally breaks it. Maybe it's quantum computing cracking Gringotts goblin-made, blood-sealed, ancient curse encryption in an afternoon. Maybe it's a Mars colony drilling into a lava tube and waking up something that makes a Hungarian horntail look like a slightly angry pigeon. Maybe it's a viral drone video of a dragon winging over some uninhabited glacier that the internet refuses to let go of, because of course it does. Look, nobody was surprised that Voldemort nearly ended the world. But what's the boring, bureaucratic, totally Muggle thing that does what he couldn't? Is it climate refugees stumbling into a hidden giant camp? Is it a billionaire launching so many satellites that Hogwarts' unplottable charms start glitching like Windows 98? For now, let's celebrate that you're basically doing free world building for the Ministry. Drop your event number 25, your personal memories, your character reactions, all of it. I'm going to pull the best ones for a follow-up where we map out a full post-statute Wizard-Muggle Cold War and dig into which characters end up running the new, messy, shared planet. And if you want more of this unhinged crossover energy, we've got deep dives coming on post-Deathly Hallows careers, Ministry politics, and what happens when magical creatures meet climate change. But the big one? We'll get to that later. An entire episode on one cursed question. How would Hogwarts possibly survive TikTok? So hit subscribe now, before the next Muggle trend breaks the wizarding world for real. So yeah, from Voldemort to viral clips, the boy who lived grew up in a world where the Dark Lord was scary, but the algorithm is relentless. That's the core contrast. Voldemort was a crisis. One monster, one war, one night in the Great Hall where everything either ended or didn't. Muggle history? It's a pressure system, slow, constant, turning the dial a little tighter every year, while magic scrambles to pretend nothing's changing. Look, nobody was surprised that the wizarding world survived one noseless fascist with a snake. They had prophecies, phoenixes, and a chosen one with plot armor so thick it might as well have been dragon hide. But what do you do against billions of cameras, satellites mapping every inch of Earth, and a global internet that went from 3% of people to basically everyone with a thumb and a Wi-Fi password? If you're wondering what really broke the wizarding world, it wasn't just one headline. It was 9/11 and anti-terror surveillance laws, which, if you've been paying attention, are basically the Muggle version of Moody's magical eye, staring at everything all the time. It was climate change pushing dragons and mer-people out of hiding because their habitats literally started falling apart. It was pandemics making Muggle governments ask very awkward questions about why St. Mungo's can cure dragon pox overnight, but apparently has nothing to say about COVID. Voldemort was a storm, big, loud, terrifying, but storms pass. Muggle history ended up being the atmosphere itself, pressing in on every ward, every unplottable forest, every Fidelius charm trying to stand up to high-resolution satellite imagery, and some intern zooming in on Google Earth at 3 a.m. Because, of course, the thing that really threatens Hogwarts is some bored teenager going, "What's that weird blur in Scotland?" And yet. For now, let's celebrate the fact that it probably worked. Hogwarts is almost definitely still there, still hidden for now, full of kids complaining about homework, passing notes and charms, arguing over Quidditch lineups, while the sky above them fills with satellites and rocket trails and whatever Elon is doing this week. So if you want to stay in this post-Deathly Hallows brain space, click right here for our deep dive on what actually happened after the Battle of Hogwarts, careers, politics, who ended up where, and how. Harry somehow became middle management at the Ministry. And over here, hit the Yafayas of Trimudi with Drofreye. Hit the video where we go full chaos and break down one specific Muggle magic crossover we teased earlier. What happens when magical creatures, climate change, and Muggle environmental law have to share the same planet. Yeah, take a moment. The camera pulls back from a glowing castle under a starry, satellite-streaked sky, the wards humming, the towers lit like a memory. The stars smear into streaks of light, the castle fades, and you're left with the YouTube end screen as the music swells, hanging on that one impossible thought. It's all still up there. For now.